Well, hello, Manchester, Auburn, and Hooksett. This is the progress report for Wednesday, April 11th. Hope everybody's having fun doing their taxes and otherwise enjoying what is a slow arriving but definitely arriving spring.
It's snow on the lawn this morning.
There was snow on the lawn.
April 11th, snow on the lawn.
I know it.
I'm watching the Red Sox game, and they're wearing these things around their neck and their head under the baseball caps. It's
Anyway, we are on, Mike and I, tonight with a very special guest that we're very excited about. And that's Mike DeSalle, who's the dean at UNH Manchester. And that's a great thing we have here, that school. But even more, we're excited because he is a big part of Army. And Army has nothing to do with the Defense Department, as I learned. It's the Advanced Regenerative Medicine Institute. The initials are Army, and it's the most exciting thing that Mike and I believe to hit the city of Manchester and the area in a long time, maybe since the founding of the Amoskeag Mills.
I've been saying that for a long time, since I first read that first newspaper article that the investment of the funding was going to be made here, and that this was going to be a center of research, interdisciplinary research. It has a lot of potential for Manchester. I'm really excited about it, and if the city and the people here play their cards right, I think this could really turn into a wonderful thing for the city of Manchester, not unlike what Amoskeag did to bring the city into existence. I think it could really do something like that.
Well, we got a lot of superlatives here. Let's see how it goes. And as always,
I'm aiming low, Bob. I'm lowballing it.
We always welcome callers. If this program leads you to want to participate by joining us, you're welcome to do that at 640-3091. I would just mention that I posted up about this show on Facebook. The Progress Report does have a Facebook page. You want to know what's coming up every week. I try and get out at least a few hours before the show, where you can check it out and see if it's something you want.
If we know who the guest is going to be,
that's right. That's right.
It's live TV. Sometimes we wing it.
In this case, we did. So, Mike, thanks for coming on and joining us. I know you're a really busy guy. I'd like to start out by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your life like? How'd you end up in Manchester? How'd you end up being an educator? How'd you end up in Army?
Sure. So, long-time New Hampshire resident, so I grew up in the town of Wolfboro, relocated there after being born in Massachusetts. My dad was actually the chairman of the history department at the town high school, Kingswood. And then I went to University of New Hampshire for my undergraduate degree in electrical engineering. Graduated in 1981. And left in 81 and came back about 35 years later. So I'm a true story of somebody who...
What brought you back?
Well, UNH brought me back.
Uh-huh.
So I spent my career in the tech industry, 18 years at Bell Laboratories, which at the time I joined was part of AT&T. You probably know Bell Labs from inventing the laser, inventing the transistor, and many other innovations. They were really the R&D arm of the telephone company.
Not to mention the Princess phone.
The Princess phone as well. So I spent 18 years there and rose through the ranks, ended up running some of their largest businesses. But then I got the urge to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, be in a smaller company, so I left the company and joined the first of what turned out to be 5 startup companies.
Really?
Each of which I ran as CEO. So these were companies in the tech industry designing and manufacturing mostly semiconductor products, some for the telecom industry, some for the Department of Defense. Was in the process of selling my last company to a fairly well-known search provider, and got a call from a headhunter asking me if I knew anybody who might be interested in the job as Dean of UNH Manchester. And after thinking about it for a day or two, I decided I was interested.
Well, that's really interesting, because you didn't have a background in higher education other than going to school.
No, other than going to school. My entire higher ed career has been over the last 2 years.
Wow.
Here
very
at UNH
unusual.
Manchester.
Really?
But I think
Could you talk a little bit about the juxtaposition of those two things, coming out of high tech and now you being in the business of inculcating young minds with information. Could
Sure.
you talk a little bit about that? It's just fascinating. I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but
Yeah,
I'd like
no,
to hear a
I think
minute.
they're closely related. I mean, to some degree, let's talk about how UNH Manchester, first of all, is similar to my past experience. UNH Manchester is a small school in an extremely competitive market. And my job, is to figure out what's going to make it financially sustainable, what's going to allow it to grow, what's going to allow it to fulfill its economic development mission for the state of New Hampshire. A lot of the challenges we face are very similar to the challenges you face running a small company. You never have enough money, you have to compete fiercely for talent, and it's hard to acquire customers. And that's exactly what higher education faces. And UNH Manchester, being a fairly young school, it was only founded in 1985 as part of UNH. We have to really figure out what our business model is going to be and what our mission is going to be, how it complements the mission in Durham, and how it is very, very different than the mission in Durham. So for me, UNH Manchester was just like another startup company.
That's
It
fascinating.
really is. It's
Yeah.
didn't think we'd be talking about that when we sat down, but that's a very interesting.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I would say is, to an increasing degree, it used to be back 20 years ago that higher education, because it was supported to such a great degree by states around the country, with the decline in state funding, and it's not just a New Hampshire phenomenon, it's a phenomenon that's occurred across the country.
Well, we've been in that position for a
Yeah,
long
the
time.
problem is we didn't have
we
far to
led
fall.
the way on skinny state funding for state
We
universities.
did. But what you find is that when things get tighter and more competitive, you need people from a diversity of backgrounds. It's not just enough to have a college full of academics. Your best chance is to have a diverse set of skills. And so you wouldn't want 100% of me at the school, but a few people that have sort of walked and talked the private sector and been in leadership roles, I think brings a perspective that higher ed needs.
So how's things going at the school? You've
they're-
got all these challenges. How are you meeting them?
I think it's going extremely well. We're in a brand new building, so we've been in the building now 3 years. It's the beautiful Pandora building at 88 Commercial. It's a building that we lease from Dean Kamen. I think we'll get to that.
We will.
We sold our former campus to Dean at 400 Commercial back in 2014. So enrollment is up. Our programs are increasingly focused on the things that the New Hampshire job market needs. So our biggest program area is biology and biotechnology. Most people would be surprised to hear that here in the city of Manchester, followed by business, followed by engineering. So it's kind of a STEM-focused school or a pre-professional school, and one that takes advantage of the fact that we're here in the city. Students can do internships by walking to them as opposed to getting into their cars. And we serve a really interesting population. 1 in 9 students is a veteran. Most students are what we tend to refer to as non-traditional. A lot of them are married, have kids, work a part or full-time job, and so we have a special place. I
Are
think,
a lot
in
of
the-
them from overseas?
They are not today, although that is part of our future plans for growth. Most of them 97% are New Hampshire residents. We don't have any residential dorms today. That is something that we'll start to introduce as institutes like Army grow, and we need to provide more housing capacity for what we hope is a lot more enrollment. But today we are a New Hampshire school. We draw from a 30-mile radius. So 97% of our students are from New Hampshire, and 94% of them stay and work in New Hampshire once they graduate. So we are
That's
an engine.
outstanding.
We are an engine for the New
Way
Hampshire
above the
economy.
statewide
And that's the
statistics.
retention part of
That's-
the
that's
acquire and
way
retain.
We think we're an example of how and what to do.
Can I ask you to step back a little bit and just maybe generalize a little bit, because as well as you guys are doing, and we sure hope you're going to improve, going forward, it's part of an education, let not really a renaissance, but a naissance in Manchester. You're not the only school here. We have the pharmacy school, we have the art school, the private school right across, what do they call it, University Square,
Yep.
where you are now.
Yep,
Can you
SMHU.
talk a little bit about Manchester and how we're growing into something of a college town? And I forgot to mention my alma mater, St. A's, just across the river.
Yeah, we truly are a college town, and I think increasingly we're trying to find a way to speak as a single community of colleges. In fact, just last Friday, we had our inaugural Day of Service event here in the city of Manchester. College students from all of the institutions, you mentioned most of them, got together and did a day of service. And we've talked about things like shared infrastructure. You know, each of the colleges in town are pretty small. So we're all sort of below critical mass to have significant expansive facilities. So one of the things that we think about is what we could do to collaborate more and provide more of a traditional college experience while being independent institutions. You know, you look at BU and Com Ave, BU defines Commonwealth Avenue. And none of us right now sort of dominate Wall Street in the same way that BU does. We'd like to do more to sort of look like a single college experience to students from outside the area.
Do the various institutions cooperate in offering students to take classes that you may not offer at SNU or St. Anselm and vice versa?
Our principal partner today is the New Hampshire Institute of Art. And for one, significant reason. Art students today, and especially the parents of art students, are looking to have their students, if they want to go to art school, have much more of a broad liberal arts college experience. That would be a very expensive thing for NHIA to build themselves. Because they'd have to invest a lot in curriculum and faculty ahead of enrollments expanding. So we have a partnership with NHIA where we're providing an increasing fraction of those liberal arts courses so that they don't have to build that capacity. So I would say today they're our principal partner.
And you will be moving into providing some residences, so you'll be looking for a broader range of students, applicants, I imagine.
We will be. So increasingly, I think you know the demographic trends in New Hampshire as well as I do.
Right.
Our school-age population is falling by 1.5% per year.
Right.
And so a school that's 97% in-state students faces a long-term challenge. So we know that we have to start to draw from pipelines of students from outside our immediate area, and it's really going to come from, I think, two principal sources. It's going to be recruiting students nationally for programs that we really distinguish ourselves in, like biotechnology and the relationship to our biotechnology program to Army, and then increasingly a bigger portfolio of professional graduate programs.
Yeah.
Today, we have a fairly small professional graduate portfolio in Manchester, and we want to increase that significantly. That'll allow us to draw from local professionals to a greater degree than we do today, and then increasingly, and you hinted at it before, international students, where we do not fully participate in that segment compared to some of our comparator schools like Rivier and New England College.
Yeah. So I think maybe we want to turn to Army, and I was going to ask you, what's the symbiosis between UNH Manchester and Army? But you've already spoken to that. Your one of your major concentrations is biotechnology.
It's biotechnology, and it to some degree it was serendipity because the biotechnology has been around for 6 or 7 years at UNH Manchester, and that was far before. Dean was given the opportunity to compete for the Army grant. That just happened to be serendipity. The real synergy came from the fact that in order to be competitive for the grant award, the winning bidder had to offer a compelling strategy for doing nationwide education and workforce development.
Wow.
And there was really no place to go in the city of Manchester for that, but the flagship university of the state. So UNH was involved from before the grant solicitation came in. So I had my initial meetings with Dean as we were preparing to receive it. So we worked together on the initial proposal and then the full proposal.
Well, I imagine some of the people that may be watching the show are not familiar with Army, don't know what it's about. So why don't you just give us the basic introduction to what Army is, what its mission is,
Sure.
what we're going to accomplish for the betterment of all.
Yeah. So the motivation, if you will, so this is a DoD-funded program in the government. So you mentioned the $80 million. That is being provided entirely by the Department of Defense. And I think their motivation is probably one that you could guess. They have a lot of fallen soldiers. And so their goal is to use regenerative medicine to return form, function, and appearance to fallen soldiers. It's as simple as that. So that could be as simple as a skin graft for a bad burn, a blood transfusion, or the loss of an entire limb or an entire organ. That's what they're motivated by, is rebuilding their fallen soldiers. It has a huge societal benefit as well. Dean talks very passionately about the impact of end-stage renal failure on the U.S. economy. It's a $100 billion business that we wish we weren't in, which is end-stage renal failure leading to dialysis and possibly transplant if you're lucky.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky. So our job is to realize the manufacture of replacement parts for soldiers to satisfy the DoD mission, but to also provide it for the U.S. population at large.
Is this what is the state of the art of this regenerative medicine business now? I mean, are there any people actually doing it? Is there an industry somewhere?
There is a very small industry. It produces products in very, very small volumes, so you can get replacement skin. That probably represents the state of the art. You can get replacement cartilage.
I'd heard something about synthetic cartilage.
You can get sort of somewhat living. Skin is a living tissue. Cartilage is not. So we fabricate certain organs and or at least segments of organs in small volume. But it's a very, very young, nascent industry. Almost everything is made in kind of a bespoke fashion. So it's very much finely tuned to the patient. It's made by hand. It's not highly reproducible, and it's extremely costly.
And is the U.S., modest as this is the U.S. the leader in the world on this right now?
I would imagine that we are. So, and we can talk about Army's role versus the role of basic research, but there is billions of dollars being spent in what you might refer to as pure research in regenerative manufacturing or regenerative medicine, broadly defined.
But that's good. That means that there's funds
There's a lot of input.
ready to be put into this industry.
So there's a lot of money being spent today, and there are a lot of research innovations that are heading towards Army. Army's job is to decide which ones are mature enough to then go turn into products.
Okay.
And we want to talk about that, what actually Army is. You guys aren't going to be, making this stuff. You guys are going to be facilitating
That's
an
right.
industry, right?
That's right.
And we've got our break coming up, so why don't we take a quick break?
And to our caller, if you want to call back, we'll take your call right after the break. We're going to take a quick break first. We'll be right back. Call us 640-3091 to talk with Mike DeSalle about UNH Manchester, or more especially about the Advanced Regenerative Medicine Institute, or Army. The biggest thing to hit Manchester. The potential is huge, so we're excited to talk about it. We'll be right back.
Was there a caller call?
Hey, we're back. This is the second segment of the April 11th, 2018 edition of the Progress Report. Me and Mike Farley are here, and we're very pleased, extremely pleased to have with us a guest we've been hoping would be available, and that's Mike DeSalle, who is involved in many exciting things. One we've talked about, which is the campus of UNH Manchester down on the Mill Yard, in what used to be the Pandora building, and the wonderful opportunities they're offering. And that is morphed into I don't know, is it 24 hours in a day? It probably isn't enough for you, because they're being dean of the University of Manchester, and also being so involved with the Advanced Regenerative Medicine Institute, or ARMI, which is just a hugely exciting opportunity that's come to Manchester. And it came here not just by happenstance, because of a lot of good work. And that's some of the things that we want to talk about. So if you want to join us, please do. And Mike, you wanted to
Well, I
into
mean,
something.
you know, the name of the show is The Progress Report, and talk about progress. We are like on the edge of science fiction here. We're actually talking about synthetic tissue generation, muscle, bone, tendons. You're talking about perhaps entire kidneys out of essentially a 3D printer, or something like that. I mean, you know, this is, they were talking about this stuff in Frankenstein, you know what I mean? This is some really exciting stuff. But I want to talk about what actually ARMI is, the ARMI. That is not a company that is going to now do research on tissue regeneration, correct?
That's right.
What actually is it? It's more of a facilitator, or an entrepreneur maker.
Yeah. So I think you said that very well. So ARMI really, I think, has two principal roles. One is to help facilitate the development of this industry, which we hope will grow to, very large size. And then the other is to make very smart investments in that industry. So the $80 million that you mentioned that comes from the DoD, Dean, in our efforts to put together our proposal, actually raised an additional matching funds level of $214 million. So there's actually about $300 million to spend.
$300 million to be invested here.
But the question is, where will that money be invested? So ARMI, to some degree, is intended to work as a venture capital firm. It goes out and it looks at promising companies. It invites proposals for projects that would take an interesting piece of tissue research and turn it into a promising product, or a promising element of a product that will support the migration to a manufacturing capability. ARMI itself does not do research, it does not do product development, but it has a lot of smart people who have done that in their careers, who can be good judges
And
of
recognize
where there's potential there.
And by taking a broad approach, you may choose to target some investment in an area that might be lagging, where you're making progress in one area, but for this component,
Yep.
you could seek out specific.
Yeah, and we'll apply dollars in an area that's particularly challenging. So one example is when you're growing tissue, it's very hard to keep alive and transport the tissue that you grew an hour before, when you're still in the process of growing enough for the intended use.
That's a challenge,
So
huh?
simply handling and feeding and caring for live tissue is itself
It's a
a
whole
major
separate
barrier.
function.
And really, that's not the domain of a biologist as much as it is perhaps the domain of a really good mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
Working with a really good electrical engineer, working with a really good software person. And so it's really about applying traditional manufacturing techniques and the innovations that you see from the semiconductor industry, the car industry, anything that where manufacturing has become extremely rich and mature, and taking those disciplines and figuring out how to apply them to regenerative medicine.
I definitely want to get back to that, but we've got
Austin's
Austin.
been patiently waiting. Austin, we're glad to welcome you to join us. We can hear you. Go right ahead with your question or comment. Hello? Whoops.
We lost Austin.
We have lost Austin.
Oh, well. Sorry, Austin.
Try again.
If you
We
want to
will
try
try
again, we'll try and get you on without delay. I'm sorry. We did kind of want to let Mike to finish that answer.
But I do want to follow up on that question. Now, I'm assuming a couple things, and that can be a dangerous thing to assume, but I'm trying to learn here. There probably will be future investment into Army if it
Things
is
go well,
successful.
yeah.
And I presume that in exchange for your investment, you're going to expect some return. So Army itself, as a company, is going to grow, and its ability to perform this function of bringing together this talent, it will grow commensurately.
Yep. So we don't worry about profit and loss as much as we worry about sustainability of the Institute. So Army, under the U.S. tax code, is a nonprofit organization.
Okay.
So we're a 501c6, and we're a membership organization. And so we basically achieve sustainability by attracting members. We imagine that we will be providing certain services to startup companies who need help getting off the ground. So think about providing incubator infrastructure for young companies who can't afford their own infrastructure. Regulatory practices are very, very difficult to navigate for a young
So you
company.
provide the
We're going to
expertise,
provide the expertise
take care
in
of their paperwork.
navigation, how to get financing for your company. So we imagine a portfolio of services that will help sustain and help young companies grow.
Yeah. So you are expecting, oh, here we have Austin again. Let's see if we can get Austin. Hi, Austin, you're with us now. Go right ahead. Hello?
You're live on the progress report, Austin.
Yes,
Go right ahead.
hi.
Hi.
2 weeks ago, I spoke about the educational system in Manchester, which is really, let's look at New Hampshire, which is the last funding school system in the entire country. $3,400 they fund for a kid, all right? So if you look at Manchester, which is 11,000, we're talking under 35%, all right? The average in the entire country for any state is 47%. Now, Manchester is now the lowest funding in the state. It's 11,800.
Mm-hmm.
And the average is 15,000 in the state. So basically, Manchester's $35 million underfunding. I mentioned that the other week and everything else. And then there was no mention. And then I sent a letter to Mr. Backus about the facts and everything else. I never got a response. There was no mention. And then last week you put Kaylee Carroll and everybody else on, which is
Austin, you are calling into a local public access television show with a budget of
Right.
$0.
Public television, I am a taxpayer, and I...
Austin, we're going to end the call because we have a show to put on. Thank you. Let's keep going.
Yeah. Austin doesn't realize that he called in, we took his call, but there was the night we had Garth Corbo on, and it was not pertinent to what our guest was talking about. And as for my not writing back, he didn't leave a return address. I wasn't able to do that. Austin,
Well, we don't need to get in arguments
I would
with
be glad
callers.
to respond to you, Austin, but this is not the right time or place because our subject today is not Manchester K through high school. It's UNH Manchester and the Army program. That's what we're talking about. And we do have wonderful institutions of higher learning here in the city, and certainly UNH is, right up there as one of the great ones. And we're anxious to learn about that. So going back to what you were telling us, Mike, about how this is all going to work, there's going to be a whole number of companies, we hope, that are going to be involved in actually producing these kind of products. Can we anticipate them coming to Manchester to be near Army, or how do you think that's going to go?
We believe we can, and I think we're already seeing some early signs of that kind of interest. We have a company that's currently located in the state of Kentucky who makes 3D bioprinters. You mentioned bioprinting technology, and they're relocating up here to Manchester because they, I think, see the potential to be part of a young, growing industry close to the Army company, and they're a startup company. They're a young company who made that decision. And so we do believe that as time moves forward, there will be an increasing number of companies who choose to found themselves here or choose to relocate from places that are much more expensive and, frankly, hard to survive when you're a young company.
Yeah.
I spent a good part of my career in the greater Cambridge, Massachusetts area. It's home to, hundreds of biotech startups. And the going rate for real estate down there is $100 per square foot compared to $10 a square foot in the city of Manchester. Just the cost of real estate eats up a young company's budget to such a great degree that it's really starting to inhibit progress in the venture capital industry. And so companies are increasingly seeking out high-quality locations around the country that have good research institutions like UNH here in New Hampshire, where they can operate much more cheaply, and having an Army here in the city already is just an increasingly attractive draw.
I'm reading from the article that was in the paper last week, and they were talking about partnerships that have already been set up with what they're calling key players, including CellLink. They are involved in the raw materials. They do three-dimensional bioprinting. Advanced Solutions, a Tennessee-based company using automation in biomanufacturing. What's the other one? Histogenics out of Waltham. They engineer tissue cartilage that we've just talked about. Worcester Polytech, I think everybody knows what that is. And then a company called Fluid Screen, a small business that specializes in particle capture system monitoring and measurement. So things are starting to come together.
They are.
And I'm sure that there's outreach every single day to other companies, and I'm sure that there's inquiries coming in from around the country as well.
They are. We held a winter summit. It was actually during the bomb storm, and we had 300 people in the city of Manchester during that storm.
Holy cow.
All of those companies that you mentioned, because they wanted to be part of what's happening down the street, and those are some of the companies that you named that are actually doing initial projects with us. So each of those are actually pursuing technical projects that hope to move the state of the manufacturing art forward.
So some of this funding you've got is already flowing out to these companies?
It is, yes.
Wow.
So we have invested in both technical projects as well as workforce development projects. So in addition to being the Dean of UNH Manchester, I serve as Army's Chief Workforce Officer. And so I'm charged with making sure that there is a national strategy for building capacity in the workforce so that we don't hold back the progress of the industry. One of the things that you get very nervous about with a young technology is that you won't attract people to it, and it'll be slowed or inhibited in its growth because young people don't know that it's something that they should be excited about.
So instead of bringing new people into the industry, they're just rating each other and not really moving along.
Exactly. And so, but we are in a competition for hearts and minds. So I want that student that otherwise might go to Silicon Valley to develop iPhone apps. If they're really talented, I'd rather see their talents applied here in the city of Manchester, in the state of New Hampshire, returning form, function, and appearance to fallen soldiers. We think that's frankly, a more interesting and noble mission, but also being incredibly satisfying.
Well, there's the great question that Steve Jobs asked: do you want to make sugar water at Pepsi, or do you want to change the world?
Yes.
That's the dilemma. Yes. But it sounds to me when you talk like that this is a national strategy. You're not interested in developing workforce for the folks that might come to work down here in Manchester. You're talking about a workforce for an industry that's going to grow 20, 30 years down the road.
So my job as Chief Workforce Officer is a national job. But my heart and mind and where I spend the rest of my time as Dean of UNH Manchester is doing everything possible to make sure that the industry really takes root here in New Hampshire. So,
that's got to be where you got to be really worried about, can we get the people here, the workforce that we need to be here?
Exactly. And we see that that's a multidimensional problem. You've probably talked about it on the show before. In addition to having the lowest funding of public education in the nation, we also have the largest percentage of students that leave the state to go to other educational institutions. So 60% of our 4-year college-bound students go to leave New Hampshire. And of course, once you go to Austin, Texas, or Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, or San Jose, California,
Those are cool cities that you're
it's
mentioning.
very hard to get those students back. And so
We
the
got to
best
make
way to
Manchester
retain
a
them,
cool city.
we got to make it a cool city, the place where you want to be.
I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but I mean, there's something to be said for that. The city has to be attractive. It has to have the infrastructure and the things that young folks
Young people
want to
want.
start their families.
Yep.
And I'm going to switch the topic to something, Bob, you and I talk about all the time. Do you think commuter rail might be a part of that infrastructure for this project?
Well, I guess the first example I can give you that I think answers the question was the Amazon RFP. So UNH actually worked with the governor's office on the response to that. And it was very clear, and I think a large part of the reason the governor wisely changed his position on commuter rail was a realization that young companies, although huge companies like Amazon, have a lot of employees that don't want to own cars. They are mass transit. They're a transit generation. I could vastly increase my enrollment at the school without building a single residential dorm or adding a space of parking, which are my limitations now, if there was rail so that students could come up from Lowell or come up from Nashua a lot more conveniently than they
The
can
tracks
today.
are
So
right across the street from your campus. They're right there.
they are. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a business case for rail. I'm not going to sort of comment on that, but what I will say is that there's a demand for it. There's a demand by millennials, there's a demand by students, and we think it's key to the city's future.
Yeah, we certainly agree. So what are the biggest, I guess the biggest challenge is, in fact, workforce development. What are you doing to, if we can do the rail, that would certainly help. But what's your strategy for meeting this workforce requirement?
Yeah, so let's talk about the New Hampshire strategy, because I think that's probably the one that the viewers care about most. So one thing that we are doing at UNH is that we are putting together a new program to attract really, really talented students that are in the state in high school as well as outside the state, to paint a picture of what a college experience in Manchester working with Army can be like. So you come in as a freshman and you immediately start being tied to the work of Army. You get to visit with the Army team. You get to understand what the biotech industry is all about. You would then have an internship. You'd have another internship. You might have a third internship in your 4-year experience. We're investing right now on the 6th floor of the UNH Manchester campus, $5 million on that floor. Today it's a 20,000 square foot shell, and we're building a biofabrication innovation center up there. And that center is going to serve a number of purposes. Number one, it's going to provide expanded capacity for teaching what we hope will be an increasing number of students who choose to come to UNH Manchester as undergraduates. It's going to be used to incubate very small companies. So we're building capacity where some of these small companies that choose to locate in Manchester can come and work on our 6th floor. We can provide them with a lot of infrastructure that they otherwise could not afford to buy themselves. And then thirdly, we're going to build infrastructure on the 6th floor to do workforce training. So as we start to spin off these innovations, we're going to try to put together a manufacturing line, if you will, and use that model manufacturing line to do things like workforce retraining. So taking vets or taking people whose skills might be a little out of date or perhaps not current for the needs of the economy, and retrain them or show them what it could be like to have skills that meet the needs of this new industry. So the 6th floor is, over the next year is going to be built out, and I think a great draw for the city.
Hope you'll have an open house so I can come down and see it.
We'll have a big ribbon cutting.
Okay. I guess it's time for our next break. We thought we had a caller, but if that caller wants to try
That
again.
was Austin calling himself Bill.
Okay, thank
Austin
you.
wants to get in a fight.
Oh, no. I
Get
got
Austin's number. I'll call him. We can talk off air.
That's how I knew it was him.
that. Okay, thanks. All right, we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back with our final segment on this, I believe, very interesting and exciting
It's thrilling,
conversation
yeah. It's absolutely
about
thrilling.
this wonderful opportunity that's been brought to Manchester by Dean Kamen and Mike DeSalle and others in the Army team, I'm sure. We'll want to talk about what that team is, too. We'll be right back. Manchester. This is the progress report for this Wednesday, April 11th. This is our last segment, so if you want to call in, this is your last chance. We're having with us is a very satisfying and inspiring even conversation.
And educational, too.
And educational about with Mike DeSalle, who is the Dean of UNH Manchester, and moreover is one of the key parts of the Army team that's going to bring the a great innovation industry to our city and maybe other places, but we hope most of it's in our city. Manufacturing tissues and organs. The primary target audience is probably our wounded veterans, so that they can, form, function, and
appearance.
And appearance. Yes. And return to a robust, wonderful life. But it'll certainly help lots of people beyond that. And it's a nascent industry. It's just a small thing, but we have substantial funding through the Department of Defense for this. And matched by 3 or 4 to 1, almost
3 to 1, yeah.
3 to 1 by private investment already, and this is just so very exciting that this is coming here. And
it's where the smart money is.
That's where the smart money is, and I think we have to give an awful lot of credit to Dean Kamen, because I am sure, Mike, that with this kind of interest and this kind of funding from the government. Lots of places would have liked to have said, I'm the home to Army, and I guess he really wanted it to be Manchester, New Hampshire.
We competed against some very, very strong competitors. So the initial proposal probably involved about 100 potential bidders. That was reduced to 3 finalists. And some of the finalists were backed by very, very wealthy states, very, very wealthy educational institutions. So we were actually vastly outbid on the numbers, but they didn't have Dean. And Dean really brought...
I was going to say, we have, there's a certain cachet about Dean Kamen.
He really brought 2 things, in my view, that distinguished us. Number one, he's been a very good, reliable supplier to the Department of Defense. When you look at his prosthetic, the limbs that he's developed, the chairs that he's developed, all serving fallen veterans. And number 2, he was from the private sector. There are several other institutes like this across the country, almost all of them, if not all of them, run by flagship research institutions. And the DoD really wanted this to be led by the private sector. So rather than putting all the money into an institution, say like UNH and UNH only, what they really wanted to do is invest in somebody who actually had relevant commercialization experience.
And he certainly does that.
And he's the guy. So I think it was really those things that overcame what was pledges of money from certain states that vastly outstripped the 214 million we raised. The good thing about the 214 million is it came from a broad network of industry players, which the other bids did not match. We really had the broad industry support that I think distinguished.
What sort of industries would support this?
Oh, so you take industries that are right here in the city of Manchester. You look at Autodesk; they're a partner. You look at Rockwell Automation, the largest manufacturer of automation control infrastructure in the world. There are a number of them. The big pharmaceutical industries are in there. Harvard's a member. MIT is a member. WPI, which you mentioned, is a member. So we've got, world-class academic institutions, but we've got a broad network of private companies as well.
Well, that's just wonderful, and it is really a startling success because, as we were speaking about before we went on the air, New Hampshire doesn't typically offer a lot of state bennies, gimmies, tax breaks.
I was talking about the package that Massachusetts and the city of Boston gave to lure GE up to the waterfront.
Yeah.
New Hampshire could not put together a package like that, but I understand there's a Senate bill that, such as it is, we're offering what we can.
Yeah.
Some tax breaks.
We are. So it's Senate Bill 564. It's being championed by Dean, and it really aims to do two things. It's really there to help work the workforce problem as well as the problem of attracting small companies to New Hampshire. So let's start with small companies to New Hampshire. It proposes that we provide companies that are operating principally in the regenerative manufacturing sector 10 years of relief from the business enterprise tax. So even if you're a small company, even if you run losses, you have to pay the BET. When you look at it across the nation, you look at the state of New York, you look at the state of Massachusetts, that's not something that a young startup company has to pay. And in fact, they typically sell their losses to companies that make profits in those states. So they actually make money off their losses. So in order to be competitive in attracting small companies, we really feel we need to take that burden off these companies. Not forever, and not as they make profits, but until such time as they get on their feet. The second part of it is debt relief for students. So if you are a New Hampshire student who has graduated from a state school, or you've graduated from a school outside the state, if you come to New Hampshire and you work in the state for at least 5 years, we will pay down part of your student debt if you work in the regenerative manufacturing industry.
So that's part of Senate Bill 564?
Part of Senate Bill 564.
Oh, very good. I hadn't heard about that. That's really good.
Yeah.
And
Now,
that's
we
gonna
still
help
have to
with
work
that retention issue too.
That helps the retention issue because you attract them here and then they have to stay in order to pocket the benefit.
What's your forecast for the timeline here? I mean, it's just starting out. I already am very excited to hear that there is one company from Tennessee, rather Kentucky, that's moving up here. That was exciting to hear.
Yeah.
Give us an idea where what you see happening in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, so I think the one thing it's important for the audience to realize is that this is a very, very long journey. So if you think back to Silicon Valley, we now know Silicon Valley as just a huge place, which is really where innovation in the country is best represented. Silicon Valley started in the mid-1950s because one individual decided to found his company there. The fellow's name was William Shockley. He was a former Bell Labs researcher, co-developer of the transistor, and he moved to, at the time, San Jose, California, because his elderly mother lived there. And that was the sole reason that Silicon Valley is in Silicon Valley. It was a fruit orchard. Stanford University was not a STEM school. It was a small liberal arts college. And so it took, we've just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the invention of the transistor. So this is a very, very long journey that we have to be very, very patient about. There will be ups and downs, there will be twists and turns, there will be a struggle for funding beyond the $80 million. But what's important is that we stay very focused on the goal and not lose that focus, because there are no quick wins in the tissue engineering space. It's subject to really strict regulations. It's going to be dependent upon attracting venture capital, because $80 million, although it sounds a lot, is a drop in the bucket in the scheme of things. It's really about how you build an industry through membership and collaboration and Army's convening power. That is what's going to get this to take off and be a multi-billion-dollar investment in Manchester, not just $80 million.
That's what we're talking about.
So you referred to the Army team. How many people are on this team right now?
Oh,
And what are they like?
I want to say probably dozens. You don't need a large team to have a lot of leverage over a small growing industry. Again, we're about making smart investments. We're not about doing the work ourselves. So we focus on convening events. We focus on providing consulting services, and we really let the industry, do the heavy lifting.
So in a lot of ways, you're really an incubator for this industry.
We are, I like to think of us as a venture capital firm. We're there to identify opportunity, invest in it, measure its success, and invest again, or help other sources of capital see the appeal of the technology.
We've only got a few minutes left, but you talked about convening events. Actually, we're being asked to close, but quickly, I saw an ad in the paper, an article about a hackathon. Set
yes.
for May. Could you, in 30 seconds or less,
Sure.
give us a quick...
So that's going to be held at my campus on May 18th and 19th. So hackathons are pretty common in the computer science industry. So a lot of young students who get really juiced on Coca-Cola come in and they code madly for a weekend and invent something cool. We're going to try to do that with bioprinters. So we're going to bring in college students, have them collaborate on fabricating something interesting. So they'll do simulations and design and actually do the fabrication with our partner CellLink.
Wow. You look like you're really excited and enjoying this a lot.
It's a lot of fun. It's not what I thought at some level I'd be retired by now, but this was too good an opportunity to pass up.
It's just fabulously exciting, and I want to thank you so much for coming and sharing what you could. We'll have to have you back, and maybe with Dean Kamen himself.
That would be lovely.
That would be lovely. We'll be back next week with another show, folks. As always, I'm going to try and get the Fisher Cats back, because we always have a baseball game, a baseball-themed show early in the season. They're opening on Friday, so it'll be after
We'll get them one of these weeks, but
we'll,
it would be nice.
if not next week, but watch our Facebook page, watch my Facebook page. When we have our guests, for sure, I'll certainly post about it. And once again, I want to thank Mike DeSalle. He has long days, I'm sure, for coming down and joining us. This has been really interesting, and it's great for the Queen City and the state of New Hampshire.
Fantastic.
No question about that. See you next week, folks.